Hello there, friends, and welcome to a discussion of the Iliad by Homer. Today we are discussing book 7 of the Iliad. So much to talk about in this book, too. It's really quite overwhelming, actually. But let's see if we can't get through at least some of it and perhaps contribute a bit to your further understanding of the work. So, book 7, the first thing to do is to take a look at the text, because remember, we're talking about chiasmus in the text and how the book actually is paralleled earlier chapters with later chapters. So let's look at the text here with Homer, the Iliad. Badoink, there it is. Book 7, Ajax duels with Hector. And as you can probably surmise, the gist of this book is that Ajax duels with Hector. So in a nutshell. So Fagel's translation, he's giving this away to us. That Ajax is dueling with Hector in this book. And we'll look at that. But what is this parallel to in terms of the chiasmus? Remember, chiasmus is balance at the beginning with something at the end. So that there's a sort of balance all the way through. So book 1 with 24 and 2 with 23 and so on and so forth. So this one is going to balance, if we go to the very end of the text, go back 7 books, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, book 20, 6, 7, book 18. The shield of Achilles. One thing to note immediately is that we have a shield described here in this text. And that may or may not be what the chiasmus is that we're looking for here. We'll talk a little bit about shields and the nature of shields, especially in the Bronze Age. But it certainly is true that the duel that we see with Hector and Ajax builds up the character of Hector. And that character, as it's being developed, is supposed to stand in contrast with the character of Achilles. So there's that. We could also compare, for instance, this to the way that Achilles acts later in the book, therefore, and see how is it compared to the way Hector acts in this book. Remember, Hector has been created for us as a sort of heroic ideal in the text. And he has flaws, he makes mistakes, it's true, but he is definitely the character that we're supposed to see as the heroic character. We saw that in the last book when he returns to Troy, and all the little tidbits that Homer gives us that show us this is a great man. This is a man who's truly worthy of emulation. Well, let's go through a few things here about the text to see what are we actually looking at when we're looking at this text. First off, the plot so far in a nutshell: Achilles makes a vow to remove himself from the war due to the swiping of his girl by Agamemnon. Then we have Diomedes, who fights the gods, and he cuts Aphrodite and he cuts Ares, and they go blubber to their respective parents. It's kind of silly. We've got Hector then returning to Troy, as I just mentioned, and the whole exchange between Hector and his wife Andromache, and the scene of his little boy and the shining helmet of Hector. And then it brings us up to this chapter. And what do we essentially have in this chapter? We've got the gods who institute a mano-a-mano fight between, you guessed it, Ajax and Hector. And then we've got the scene of Hector in that fight and what happens to him. And then at the end of all of that, we've got the building of a large trench around the Achaean army. So that's kind of this chapter in a nutshell. Remember, we're looking at themes particularly that are developing during the course of this epic. So we've got the theme on the one hand of Menin, which is rage, like mania, is the same Indo-European derivation there, Menin, mania. We've got the themes of Kleos and Aristeia, glory and greatness, and then the Aristeia, which is sort of the chapter where a character shows how great they are, especially in battle. We've got the themes of hubris, pride, that we see in Achilles. And then we've got an underlying current of iconoclasm that goes through this story, where Homer he's taking away the power of the gods, and he's exalting the power of humans, so to speak, or he's diminishing the gods in reverential stature, and he's raising up certain humans to be people that we look at and say, that's amazing what humans can do, or that's amazing, that character that we want to follow. A strange shifting of theological value going on during the course of this epic. The main theme that I've been trying to emphasize here is the theme of metamorphosis. This change or alteration that occurs, especially in every human life, from child to adult. And it follows that course, if you will, of the caterpillar to a butterfly, where the caterpillar starts off as the grub worm and then moves to the chrysalis and then moves to the butterfly, emerges as a butterfly after being smashed or pulverized inside of that glowing chrysalis. You'll notice certain correspondences in the story, like crises and chrysaeus, same Greek word, shining or bright. The fact that the grub worm is Achilles in some ways, this sort of juvenile blubber boy type Achilles, right? The one who cries. Well, let's look first at some things historical. Remember that Homer is writing during the 8th century in the course of Ionia, and that he is writing about an event that occurred 400 roughly years prior to his poetry. And he's not even writing, I shouldn't even use that term. He's singing the poem, which then later is collected together and grouped according to these 24 books, written down first on papyri and then scrolls and then later on vellum. But that's all historical bit. So there are inaccuracies, or what are called anachronisms, in the course of the text, and we'll see those as they come up. But one of the historical points that he does seem to get right is something to do with the size of the shields that the men use in battle. So let's take a look at that for just a minute and talk a little bit about battle gear. What was it like? We're talking the age of the Bronze Age here. The Bronze Age was an era where trade in tin and copper allowed people to craft or fuse together these two different metals and create bronze, which is a very shining metal, flexible, but strong enough to be used for weapons and shields. And there are different types of body shields that were used during the course of battle in the Bronze Age Greece. We have what's called a tower shield. It's a very tall shield, covered most of the body. And tower shield was used by the shock troops, as they're called, the people that were contacting in battle, pounding against each other. They would not be used by like a scout or that sort of thing. By the way, this is taken from, this is the website, the Greek Age of Bronze, and the home site here. We'll go back for just a minute. Greek Age of Bronze, Weapons of Warfare in the Late Helladic Time. It's a good website. So the tower shield is one of the major types. We see evidence of that on various pottery and various depictions of soldiers throughout the ancient world. And then you had another type of shield, which is the figure of 8 shield, where they took the bronze, the tower shield, and they curved it, and they made this curved bit in here, sort of like curved interiorly, so that you could put a spear there, rest a spear there as you're charging towards the enemy. And this type of shield and the bronze tower shield show up quite frequently. You can see it here on pottery, so on and so forth. And then you had all of the other kinds of smaller types of shields that were used by scouts, small leather shields, wooden shields were frequently used. A lot of tower shields here. This is what was called the proto-dipylon shield. The curve is very pronounced here, so you can see where they would have rested the spear on there as they moved forwards. By the way, I don't claim to be a Bronze Age expert or an expert in armor. I just like things and find them interesting. Now, all of these different types of shields, you might say, wow, that would be pretty darn heavy to carry into battle. Yes and no. Most of these shields were not solid bronze, and that's a misconception that we frequently see coming out of Hollywood and elsewhere. You can see something of the construct in this picture here, which is a modern rendition. A shield would have been several layers of different types of material, because they didn't use something like Kevlar, which is just one type of body armor. They would use different layers that would then deflect the force of a spear or an arrow, or sometimes a sword if they could, because each one would respond differently and slow down the impact or the force or power of that blow. So you might have, say, a wicker shield that would then be covered over with dried ox hide, and maybe 2 layers of dried ox hide. or you might have leather, of another type of animal on top. And then only at the very last would you cover over the exterior with a layer of bronze, because the layer of bronze would be the initial contact for the blow that would occur. So your shield would not, it would be heavy enough, but it wouldn't be so heavy that you couldn't lift the thing, because you'd have to carry it through battle, and you'd have to be able to present it towards the enemy so you could deflect blows. Otherwise, it would be absolutely useless. So you'd have a wooden frame, or maybe a cane, or some sort of like bamboo sort of thing, reed frame that you would hold on to, and straps that would strap around your outer arm here, and maybe one that would strap around the shoulder or the neck. And then onto that frame, you would have the stretched material of some sort that would then be the first layer, and then 2 or 3 other layers of oxhide. And then on the exterior, you might have bronze, or you might have some other hardened material that would be put out here, and then bronze on the edge. So when we're talking about bronze shields, we're talking about several layers that would be used in order to create a barrier between you and your enemy. There are some existing examples of shields. So you had these are Celtic, same time period, but these are ones that are recovered later. So this one is much later in time. It says dated by the museum to 350 to 50 BC. It's a Celtic version of a bronze shield. This is what's called the Yatholm type shield. This is older. It's 1300 to 800 BC bronze. Let's see if you can see these, because I don't press the right button. So here's the Yatholm type shield. You can see that this one is like bronze that has been curled around in different layers. This one is the Battersea shield. That's much later, but it's a style that was carried on for several years. So the full outfit of a soldier, you see the picture here that we saw earlier, the full outfit of a soldier might consist of all of these, or some of these various bits that he would use in battle, including strong greaves, which are the shin guards. Imagine a modern soccer player who wears shin guards. You'd have the shield, which he could carry with one arm, strapped across the shoulder and around his front. You'd have the helmet, which would have various types of plumage. Then you'd have a suit of armor, and suit of armors could take different forms, but they would normally be overlapping plate of bronze, which was light enough, again, to wear, and underneath that you would have a quilted thing of some kind that would protect you from the blows, and you'd have a gorget protecting your neck, and the pieces on either side that would protect blows from either side. And then you carry with you your bronze sword or your spear, and perhaps wear sandals, if anything, because a lot of guys would go into battle barefoot, which gives me squeamish ideas of all kinds. I don't like that idea. Anyway, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about shields. So when we get into the text, what we see this description of shields in battle, and what happens during the description of a shield. And later on in the text, we'll see the shield of Achilles that comes up. One of the major ideas to consider in this chapter is what actually is meant when we talk about a hero. Or what do we mean by hero? And I've dealt a little bit with this last time, but you'll notice in this text that we get a lot about what a hero means when we see this image of Hector. It's the same thing we might want to ask of what do we mean by an adult? Not that all adults are heroes, but what do we mean by an adult? I think that Homer is suggesting that adulthood or maturity is synonymous with heroism. In other words, you can have a person who's older in years, like Paris, for instance, but he's not really an adult, and he's not a hero for sure. That's pretty obvious. Heroism in the Homeric imagination is really the same as being mature, being an adult. It seems to have to do with grappling with the necessities of life, and we certainly saw that with the previous chapter when Hector returns and says to his wife, "I do this out of a question of honor and shame, and I do this mostly because I don't want to see you put into a situation that would be horrible, and so I'm fighting to protect you, Andromache." That form of accepting what's necessary, even though it's not pleasant, is an adult vision of the world, according to Homer. And it's a heroic vision as well. But I think one of the things we see in this chapter particularly is a question of risk. And I think that Homer is making a point in this chapter that risk is intimately wound up with what it means to be an adult. That plays also into the whole iconoclastic thing that he's been developing as well. Because, see, gods don't have risk. They're eternal. They're almighty. As we saw in a few chapters ago with Diomedes, even when they get cut or stabbed, as Ares is, they're healed almost instantly. And they live forever because of ambrosia that they drink or eat or whatever it is. And so gods don't have risk. And when you don't have any risk, when nothing could be lost, you don't have any shirt in the game, so to speak. You don't have any stakes in the outcome. You aren't trying to actually make the thing work because who cares? We'll just try the next time. And I think Homer's making a really interesting point here, that he contrasts the world of the gods, these divine spirits, or these neters, neteru as the Egyptians called them, that are eternal and have no responsibility, no risk. They can do anything they want, versus the humans who risk everything, including their own life and their own family. And only by that risk do they actually have any maturity or adulthood or heroism, for that matter. Take for a minute and look at what happens with the contrast of Hector and his challenge with Ajax versus the opening of this chapter, which is between the gods. If we scroll down a little bit, we say, okay, we've got this war going on, and Athena jumps up and she starts intercepting Apollo and braiding him, because Apollo's going to go down to the battle again, right? He just does this sort of thing on a regular basis. So it says, as soon as fiery-eyed Athena marked them, killing Argive ranks in this all-out assault, because the Trojans are attacking the Argives, down she rushed from the peaks of Mount Olympus straight for sacred Troy. But Phoebus Apollo, spotting her from Pergamus heights, the god grim set on victory for the Trojans, rose to intercept her. As the two came face to face beside the great oak, Lord Apollo, the son of Zeus, led off. What next? What is the mighty Zeus's daughter blazing after now? Down from Olympus, what heroics stir your heart? No doubt you'll hand your Argives victory soon. You'll turn the tide of battle. You have no mercy, none for dying Trojans. Come, listen to me. My plan is so much better. Let us halt the war in the heat of combat now, at least for today. They'll fight again tomorrow, until they win their way to the fixed doom of Troy, since that is your only passion, you two goddesses, to plunder Troy to rubble. So here's Apollo, who supports Troy, and he is stopping Athena from supporting the Argives because right now, he thinks they'll fight again tomorrow? Or is it because the Trojans are defeating the Argives and he wants them to continue defeating the Argives? So he's going to stop Athena? One way or the other, you have to ask the question, why does he bother? Because there's no impact for him. We know Troy's going to fall. We know that basically he doesn't have to care one way or the other. So he is the one who stops her, and then she says, sounds great, I'll stop, right? Tell me, how do you hope to stop the men from fighting? How do you hope to stop the men from fighting? She doesn't care either. Neither Apollo or Athena really care what's going on. And Apollo says, I'll tell you what, we'll spur them up to have a mano-a-mano conflict. And Athena's all for it, right? She's all afire. It says her eyes of fire, the goddess Pallas did not resist a moment. And she says, yeah, that's a great idea. We'll go down and we'll stir them up to a mano-a-mano conflict, one-on-one conflict. And all the armies sit down, and Hector comes up to give his challenge because he's been spurred by what he thinks is his brother, Helenus, but it's actually the god speaking through him. Now, right off the bat, we've got to say This is itself an anachronism because the men in the ancient world didn't do this. And so when we look at the poem, we say, oh, that's weird that they would all sit down in the middle of battle and then have two guys give big speeches and fight each other. Yeah, it's weird. It's artistic. It's an artistic license. This didn't occur. Homer, remember, is writing at something that was 400 years prior to him, and he's making a lot of it up, as artists tend to do. So this wouldn't have happened historically, or was probably very rare. But in terms of the poem, what he's doing is he's setting up a situation where we can see Hector as a character refining that vision for us of who this guy actually is. In addition to it, this little mano a mano thing refines the character of the gods, because the whole war could have been over, Trojans defeating Argives, except for that the gods themselves agree to this mano a mano thing rather than letting the course of history work itself out. And if that isn't enough, when the gods sit down to watch the whole business, because Helenus has encouraged Hector to offer a challenge, the gods are described in a certain way that's very peculiar. Remember, Homer is frequently using what are called Homeric epithets or Homeric similes. A Homeric epithet is where he tags on a word to somebody. So Hector the flashing helmet, right? Helen of the ox-eyed Helen, or Paris of the great war cry. That's a Homeric epithet. A Homeric simile is where you say, like this, such and such and such and such. So like a great storm cloud, so the Argives came on. And you might draw it out a little bit longer. Here he uses a Homeric simile that is rather startling, actually. It says, when Hector heard that challenge, he rejoiced, and right in the no man's land, along his lines he strode, gripping his spear mid-haft, staving men to a standstill, while Agamemnon seated his Argives, geared for combat. And Apollo, lord of the silver bow, and Queen Athena, for all the world like carrion birds, like vultures, slowly settled atop the broad towering oaks sacred to Zeus, whose battle shield is thunder, relishing those men. Now, you're a human. I'm a human. Homer was a human. Homer's audience was a human being. How do we take this? These are supposed to be the glorious gods that we worship. And here they're described like vultures. What do vultures eat? Dead people, right? And if they're settling on the trees like carrion birds, like vultures, that's a strange image to bring up. Because why? It's as though they're just settling down to watch who's going to kill whom. And the corpse they're going to feast on afterwards, these gods. Do you see what I'm getting at? That basically this is part of this iconoclasm that he's creating, this destruction of the way of worshiping the gods as though they were perfect. They are not perfect. They settle on the trees like carrion birds. There's something vicious about them and bloodthirsty, and yet there's nothing for them to lose. They have no stake ultimately in the outcome. They could have the Trojans win and they would still continue. They could have the Argives win and they would still continue because they are neteru, they're perpetual, and therefore there's no consequence for them at all. If there's no consequence, how can those gods be heroic? They can't. That's Homer's point. Heroism comes with risk. The gods do not risk anything. And consequently, they're a bit like vultures, watching over to see who's going to die next so that we can feast on the corpse. I don't like that. Do you like that? If you do, maybe that's your thing, but I don't like that. Well, let's move on, because we see this talk of battle, mano a mano, is coming up, and Hector, he gives a challenge to the Argives. He says, send me your best guy, the guy that you think is toughest, and I'll fight him. And whoever wins, they basically get to solve the war by whoever wins. And whoever dies, at least will honor his body and will say, what a wonderful thing that he fought so bravely and so nobly. And we can raise up a monument to him. So here is Hector. He says, hear me, Trojans and Achaeans geared for combat. I'll speak out what the heart inside me urges. Our oaths are sworn truce. Zeus, the son of Cronos, throned in the clouds, has brought them all to nothing. And all the Father decrees is death for both sides at once. Until you Argives seize the well-built towers of Troy, or you yourselves are crushed against your ships. But now, seeing the best of all Achaeans fill your ranks, let one whose nerve impels him to fight with me come striding from your lines. A lone champion pitted against Prince Hector. Here are the terms that I set forth. Let Zeus look down, my witness. If that man takes my life with his sharp bronze blade, pardon me. If that man takes my life with his sharp bronze blade, I will strip my gear and haul it back to his ships, but give my body to friends to carry home again. So Trojan men and Trojan women can do me honor with fitting rites of fire once I am dead. But if I kill him and Apollo grants me glory, I'll strip his gear and haul it back to sacred Troy and hang it high on the deadly archer's temple walls, but not his body. I'll hand it back to the decked ships so the long-haired Achaeans can give him full rights and heap his barrow high by the broad Hellespont. And someday one will say, one of the men to come, steering his oar-swept ship across the wine-dark sea, there's the mound of a man who died in the old days, one of the brave whom glorious Hector killed. So they will say, someday, and my fame will never die. I can't stress enough how much of heroism is in that speech that he's giving here. It's a challenge, yes, to the Argives. But in that challenge, he's saying, let's agree that whoever dies will honor their body, and we will set up a monument for them so that their fame, their kleos, can last long after they're dead. Let's treat the body with reverence. Now, not only is that going to be contrasted later in the epic when Achilles deals with Hector, but also it shows that Hector is really, he's not a bloodthirsty guy. He's not a carry-on bird. He's not just there in order to kill. He is there in order to do something that he doesn't like to do, which is to fight in battle with the possibility of dying, the idea of risk. And he wants a quick end to the battle. He wants to be done with it, right? And so he offers this as a possibility to be done with the battle. It's decided here and now. And whoever loses will give over the battle, finish, say, we're done. You win, your team wins. And whoever dies will honor their body. As a side note, this is how a lot of sporting events actually came into existence. A lot of sports that we now enjoy began as these ritual combats that would occur before the actual combat. You'd get your best warriors together and they'd play a game of hurley, for instance, in Ireland, or they'd play a game of stickball in American Indians. And sometimes people would die in those events. But whatever the case, whoever won the fake conflict, it might decide the battle afterwards. They might decide not to go to battle after that. Oh, yeah, we've already taken out all your big warriors, so, you've lost and just give in. But it might also be, the predecessor to the actual conflict that occurred. So what we're seeing here is a sort of a record of the way that they used to decide a lot of these combats, these conflicts. But the more important thing is just this challenge that he gives, and he's met with a hushed silence, as he says. All these Achaeans are they're ashamed, that they're scared of him because he is a powerful warrior, but they also want to end the war too. And so there's this kind of moment of tension. And Menelaus jumps up and says, I'll do it. I'm the guy who started it. I'll do it. Kind of noble of him. But immediately he's talked down, right? No. Agamemnon, no, brother. You're not going to do it. That's not you. You're mad. Okay, let somebody else do it. And so Menelaus is like, all right, fine. And he steps down. And old Nestor steps up and he says, I'm ashamed of all you guys. All you are guys. I'm ashamed of you. I used to fight guys all the time when I was younger, and I took down this really big dude in battle. And if only I were young again, I'd be able to do it all over again, but I'm not, right? And I'll tell you a little story because, he's an old guy. And so he goes on and on. And he tells this story about how he fought this big warrior and he still defeated him, right? Eruthalion. And why don't you our guys do this? Are you such wusses that you can't do what an old man would like to do if he had the power? And immediately 9 guys jump to their feet. And they are Agamemnon and then Tydides, that's Diomedes, the son of Tydeus, and then great and little Ajax, and then after Idomeneus and his aide Meriones, and then Eurypylus and Euaemon, the son, Thoas, son of Andromon, and then Odysseus. So all these guys jump up. I'll do it. I'll fight Hector. And they have to cast lots to find out who does it. So it shows that what Hector is up against is this army of very enthusiastic killers that are scared at first, but then when they're encouraged, they all jump up. And the one that gets it is Ajax. And Ajax is huge. This is great Ajax, not lesser Ajax, great Ajax. Ajax is huge. And I think it's highlighting the fact that Hector was making the challenge in order to end the war because he knows he wants to end the war, but he bit off more than he can chew. Ajax is a giant of a man. And basically, when he gets into the fight with Ajax, we see that Hector is outmatched, right? So nevertheless, he doesn't shrink from battle. He actually jumps into battle to try and fight Ajax. And basically, when he jumps in, we get this great scene of the two of them fighting with each other. Just to look at that real quick, because it's a good scene. It says, so giant Ajax marched, that bulwark of the Achaeans, a grim smile curling below his dark, shaggy brows, under his legs power taking immense strides, shaking his spear high, its long shadow trailing. Big, powerful guy, right? How could he shrink before the enemy slipped back into the crowd of cohorts now? He was a challenger with his lust for battle. Ajax strode on, closing, bearing his huge body shield like a rampart, heavy bronze over 7 layers of ox hide, which is a pretty good description of what we talked about earlier, right? The construction of shields, right? And it goes into a little bit more detail, right, of the shield. Tychius made it for him, laboring long, the finest leathersmith by far, over in Hyle, where the master had his home. He crafted that famous gleaming shield for Ajax, layering 7 welted hides of sturdy, well-fed bulls, and hammered an 8th layer of bronze to top it off. Which, again, is like, this is a poetic license, right, that you got this battle, it's brewing, but let's look at that shield. Which I find it kind of funny. But it does give a parallel to something that's happening later in the text, which is the shield of Achilles, just as a heads up, because it sort of balances out in that chiasmatic style. Telamonian Ajax marched right up to Hector, threatening with his deep resounding voice, Hector, now you'll learn once and for all in combat man-to-man what kind of champions range the Argive ranks, even besides Achilles. That lion heart who mauls battalions wholesale. Often his beaked seagoing ships Achilles lies, raging away at Agamemnon, marshal of armies. But here we are, strong enough to engage you, and plenty of us too. Come, lead off if you can with all your fighting power. So, besides Achilles, Ajax says, we've got tons of other guys just as powerful, and they're all ready to take you on. You guys don't stand a chance in Troy. And I think to a great degree, he's right. And Hector knows that he's right, and yet he doesn't shirk from battle. He knows that he has to move in and fight this guy and be honorable to what he just proclaimed publicly. And so with a flash of his helmet, Rangy Hector shook his head, and he says, don't toy with me like a puny, weak-kneed boy or a woman never trained in works of war. War, I know it well, and the butchery of men. Well, I know. Shift to the left, shift to the right, my tough, tanned shield. That's what the real drill, defensive fighting means to me. I know it all. How to charge in the rush of plunging horses. I know how to stand and fight to the finish. Twist and lunge in the war god's deadly dance. On guard. big and bluff as you are, I've no desire to hit you sniping in on the sly. I'd strike you out in the open. Strike you now. And he hurled, chucks at Ajax. And it's a big hurl, right? Through 6 hides it tore. The 7th stopped the relentless brazen point. Which again is like a lot of students will ask, well, how does he know? How was he there recording how it went? It's just artistic license, folks. So just calm down. Basically, he's saying it's a strong shield, but the throw was powerful and it almost got Ajax. But then Ajax has his turn. Dear to the gods, he hurled, and his spear's shadow flew, and the shaft hit Hector's round shield, hit full center. So as Hector threw his spear right, and it just almost went through, Ajax throws his spear, and it goes right at the center of the shield. And straight through the gleaming hide, the heavy weapon drove, ripping down and in through the breastplate, finally worked, tearing the war shirt. Close by Hector's flank it jabbed, but the Trojan swerved aside and dodged black death. So the throw that Ajax gives is so powerful. It goes right through the shield and tears the shirt. I mean, he was that close. It's like, finding a bullet hole in your helmet after the battle, right? Then they both wrench out their lances and they come at each other with their swords. And it says here, Ajax lunged at him, thrusting hard at his shield, and the shaft punched through, rammed him back in his fury, and grazed his neck, and the dark blood gushed forth. So Ajax is really overpowering Hector here, if you're following the sequence of battle. Because as they are fighting with each other, stabbing at each other, he stabs with his sword, and he cuts him in the neck, and blood comes out. And so that's a sign that you're getting overpowered. You're starting to lose the battle, right? But Hector didn't quit. Backing, helmet flashing, his strong hand hefting a rock from the field, dark, jagged, a ton weight, he hurled it at Ajax. So he doesn't quit. He goes and he grabs a rock and he throws it at Ajax. And he struck the shield, and it echoed around and around as Ajax hoisting a boulder. He does the same thing because he blocks it. And then he hoists a boulder, far larger, wheeled and heaved it, putting his weight behind it. And you'll see here in this battle, it's not accurate historically. It's accurate poetically, because again, Homer is not striving for historical or realism here. He's striving for a poetic realism. And so he has the two with spears and spears, and then with sword and sword, and then with stone and stone, okay? Because he's wanting to show the contrast here. Ajax outweighs Hector, and Hector knows it. And yet Hector, realizing the risk, is still charging into battle because, on the one hand, he's made this claim, and it would be shameful to back down. And number two, he wants to protect his family and end the war. So he gets hit by this rock that Ajax throws. Ajax hoisting a boulder, far larger, wheeled and heaved it, putting his weight behind it, tremendous force, and the rock crashed home. Hector's shield burst in, hit by a millstone. And Hector's fine knees buckled flat on his back. He went, his shield crushing down on him, swept him off his feet. That's not good, at least for Hector. He is knocked backwards, his shield on top of him, and he's down in the dirt like a turtle. And at this moment, Ajax could just swoop in and kill him. Fortunately for Hector, Apollo, who, remember, Apollo supports Troy, Apollo pulls him up. And now they would have closed with swords, but the heralds rush in. Again, would this have really happened historically? Probably not. But the heralds rush in and they say, whoa, slow down, guys. It's getting dark. Let's stop the battle for now. We'll do some more later, okay? No more, my sons. Don't kill yourselves in combat. Zeus and marshals of Stormcloud loves you both. You're both great fighters. We all know that full well. Everybody gets a prize. But the night comes on at last, so we best yield to night. So game called on account of nighttime, right? And Ajax says, tell Hector to call that truce. I'm ready to kill him, right? I'm mad for it. And Hector says, okay, Ajax, okay, right? You are the strongest spearman, but let's break off the duel. So prudence being the better part of valor, he actually retreats from this combat. Had he stayed in the combat, he would have died. And that's the risk that we're looking at here. This was Hector overpowered by Ajax, and yet accepting the risk as much as he can, giving it his all, getting in there and actually struggling, even knowing that he was going to be killed. He's saved by a sort of actus Dei, right? An act of God. And that heroism is something we see over and over again in Hector, that he's always willing to put himself at risk in order to try and get the job done, in order to do what he has to do to protect his wife and kids. It stands in direct contrast to Paris, his brother, who will not do that. And it stands in direct contrast to Achilles, who has shirked his duty in battle. And it's supposed to, because it's supposed to show to us, this is what we're supposed to be like. This is where we are. And this is what we're supposed to be like. And the metamorphosis of Achilles is supposed to move more towards a Hector-like attitude. We, as the followers of this epic, are supposed to follow or emulate that Achilles metamorphosis or change or alteration. All right, so that being said, the book concludes with the Argives meeting and saying, hey, let's build a trench and gather our dead. And then the Trojans meet and say, hey, let's gather our dead. And they say, we're done with this war. Let's give Helen back, because the Argives are going to kill us all. We're obviously overpowered. And Paris steps in and says, no, I'm not going to give up the girl. I'm not going to give up the prize that I have, which is Helen. And it's a really kind of an interesting thing that occurs, because here's the passage. Everybody recognizes that they're overpowered. Everybody recognizes the city's going to fall. Everybody recognizes that Paris is in the wrong. But Paris says, I'm not going to give up the girl. And so they continue fighting. And everybody hates Paris. Now, I've often wondered this with the story. Why don't they just throw Paris over the wall? You know, why don't they just let Paris go out there and get killed? Wouldn't that be easier? But that wouldn't be the tragedy, of course. It says, now the Trojans collected high on the crest of Troy. They were shaken, distracted men at Priam's gates, but the clear-headed Antenor opened up among them. Hear me, Trojans, Dardans, all our loyal allies. I must speak out what the heart inside me urges. On with it. Give Argive, Helen, and all her treasures back to Atreus' sons to take away at last. We broke our sworn truce. We fight as outlaws. True. And what profit for us in the long run? Nothing, unless we do exactly as I say. We aren't going to gain anything, right? We aren't going to gain anything if we stay here trying to hold on to Helen. We're all going to die. We're all going to get killed. We're going to get scuttled. So give her back. Give Helen back. We broke the law when we took her, which is pretty obvious to everybody, including the audience. But then Paris says, nope. Stop, Antenor. No more of your hot insistence. It repels me. You must have something better than this to say. But if you are serious, speaking from the heart, the gods themselves have blotted out your senses. Now, I say this to our stallion-breaking Trojans. I say no, straight out. I won't give up the woman. And we get here a sense of just how, you just want to take that Paris and, because he's just an awful character. And he offers a counter possibility. All those treasures I once hauled home from Argos, I'll return them all. And I'll add from my own stores. What does that tell you about him? I mean, notice here, we've been operating under the idea this whole war is fault for Helen only. But Paris says, I won't give back Helen, but I will give back all those treasures I once hauled home from Argos. Which means he not only seduced Helen and took her back to Troy, but he also stole a great deal of treasure from Argos, from Menelaus. That's disturbing. And the fact that he's like, okay, I'll give back the treasure, and I'll give maybe a little more too from my own treasure house, but I'm not going to give back the woman. It sits very poorly, not only with the Trojans, but with the Argives. And it makes us realize this guy is an awful guy. Who would put his entire city at risk? All these good people, all these good men, all these good women and children, who would put them all at risk for Helen? Not that Helen's bad, but Paris is definitely bad. And then when we get the herald who comes to deliver this message to the Argives, to the Achaeans, it's interesting the way that he delivers this message, because basically Priam comes forward and he says, well, this is what we're going to do. I must speak out what the heart inside me urges. Now, take your evening meal throughout the city just as you always have, and stand your watches, each man wide awake. And then at first light, let the herald Idaeus go to the beaked ships and tell the Atreidai, Agamemnon and Menelaus, the offer of Paris who caused our long, hard campaign. Let Idaeus add this too, a good, sound proposal. See if they are willing to halt the brutal war until we can burn the bodies of our dead. We'll fight again tomorrow. Okay, so give that as a message. Idaeus goes, and here's the message he gives. Remember that in the ancient world, a herald would normally deliver the message of his king verbatim, word for word. We see that with the gods frequently when they send a messenger down to earth. The reason for it is that if the herald delivers the message word for word, he's not responsible for the message. Don't kill the herald, right? He's not responsible for the message. His Lord is responsible for the message. He's merely a conduit. It's like, don't kill the internet, right? Don't kill the telephone. It's just delivering the message. But the herald Idaeus here doesn't really say verbatim what Priam told him to say. And I find this amusing and dark at the same time. He says here, son of Atreus, captain of all Achaeans, Priam and noble Trojans, command me to report, if it proves acceptable, pleasing to one and all, the offer of Paris who caused our long, hard campaign. See, it's the same line. All the treasures that filled his hollow ships and the prince hauled home to Troy. Would to God he drowned before that day. He'll return them all and add from his own stores. Now, you see this little line that he adds in there? I think it's really interesting. Paris says, I'll give back all these treasures that filled my hollow ships and I hauled away to Troy, and I'll return them all and some from my stores. He says that. And so Idaeus says exactly that, but then he adds that little line, would to God that Paris had drowned. Right? We hate him. We all hate him. Every one of us. And he says, but the lawful wife of Menelaus, renowned Menelaus, see, Idaeus is recognizing this as the lawful wife of Menelaus, he will not give her up. Paris makes that clear. Though all Troy commands him to do precisely that. In a way, it's like Idaeus is saying, look, we're all against Paris. We hate Paris. Like you hate Paris. When the city falls, don't kill all of us. Just kill Paris. We don't want to die. But it doesn't work. Because he says, if you're willing, come, we'll halt the brutal war. We burn all our bodies. We'll fight tomorrow and all this. And immediately Diomedes jumps up and he says, no one touched the treasures of Paris, Helen either. It's obvious. Any fool can see it. Now at last the neck of Troy is in the noose. Her doom is sealed. Diomedes immediately notices they wouldn't have made this offer if they weren't desperate. And so it kind of works against them, and the Argives get charged up by this, realizing they've got the Trojans are sort of over a barrel here, so to speak. They've got them ready to destroy them all. And we kind of end the story with the herald goes back and tells this thing, and then the Argives get together and they dig a big old trench under the advice of Nestor, and they collect their dead. And this trench with the great walls that they build and the fortress that they make around their ships becomes an important point of the story as we go forward. So we'll conclude with one more thing here, which is a quick bit of mythology. Because you might be asking yourself, well, why do Apollo and Poseidon support Troy? I mean, we've got the gods on either sides of the battle, right? And we know that Aphrodite supports Troy because Paris chose Aphrodite and that whole judgment of Paris thing. And Athena and Hera support the Argives because they are attacking the Trojans who rejected those two goddesses. There's another bit of story to add to this, and I think it's important just to touch on it before we conclude for today, which is this is the story of Laomedon. And the story of Laomedon is intimately tied up with the story of Troy, the Trojan War. So we're going to skip to that real quick. In Greek mythology, Laomedon was this Trojan king. Now, he's the son of Ilus. He's a nephew of Ganymede and Assaracus. Ganymede is important. He goes on to be the cup holder of Zeus. But he is a nephew of Ganymede and Assaracus. He's the son of Ilus or Ilius. Laomedon was variously identified with different parents and siblings, as well as numerous children, including Priam and Tithonus. He had all these wives, and he owned magical horses with divine parentage, so on and so forth. Zeus sent Poseidon and Apollo to serve Laomedon as punishment for a conspiracy against Zeus. So in the mythological sphere which Homer is writing in, the matrix that he's writing in, we have these myths that his audience would have been familiar with. One of the myths is that Poseidon and Apollo at one point try to overthrow Zeus. Zeus takes his recently crafted lightning bolts and he zaps them. He overpowers them real easy, like zap, zap, or young Skywalker, similar thing. And Apollo and Poseidon are beaten, and Zeus is ready to kill them. But then I think it's Leto, one of the nymphs, actually pleads for their life, and he says, all right, fine. I'm just going to strip you of your godhead. You won't have your godly-like power for a year, and you have to go down and serve this guy, Laomedon. So when they go down to Laomedon, Laomedon says, why don't you build me some walls for my city? And they go and they build the walls of Troy, the city that later becomes Troy, right? Laomedon then refuses to pay these two gods. That leads to pestilence and a sea monster. And he ends up having to sacrifice his daughter Hesione to the sea monster. But Heracles comes by just at that moment. He's like, what's going on here? So, I'm going to save that girl. And so he goes and he beats the sea monster and he saves Hesione. And Laomedon then refuses to pay Heracles as well. And Heracles makes war on Troy, strangely enough. Eventually, Heracles conquers the city. He kills Laomedon and all his sons, except for one. The son that he doesn't kill is named Podarcus. And Podarcus, it says, is ransomed. His life is ransomed by Hesione. And Podarcus goes on to become king of this city that's been created by Apollo and Poseidon. And he becomes the first ruler of that city, the first and most powerful, the big guy, which in Greek is Priam. So Priam, the king of this story that we're reading right now, Troy, his real name is Podarcus. And Podarcus is the last son of Laomedon, who refused to pay Heracles, and before that had refused to pay Poseidon and Apollo. He's a real skinflint. I mean, imagine that. You've got two gods who build your whole city, and essentially they build it in a year, and then you're like, I'm not going to pay you. They're gods. Stupid. Pay them. But, that's the way it pans out. And the city, Troy, is Troia or Ilion, based on the father, Ilus, of Laomedon. The Iliad, which we're reading now, is based on the original name of that city, Troia, which was also called Ilios or Ilion. So that's why we had called the Iliad. In case you were wondering what, the normal joke is that it's a story about sick people and therefore it's the Iliad. No. It's the Iliad based on the name of the father of Laomedon, Ilios or Ilios. Anyway, it says these names seem to date back to the Bronze Age, as suggested by Hittite records, which refer to a city in the northwest Anatolia called Wilusa or Truisa. And there's the, you can see here, this is the script here, that writing of Wilusa, which is now generally identified with the archaeological site of Hisarlik near Tevikaia, right, in Anatolia, which I probably pronounced wrong. In Greek myth, these names were held to originate from the names of the kingdom's founders, Tros and his son, Ilus. So we're reading about the city of Tros, Troias, and his son, Ilus. And the city also called Ilius or Ilion, the plain area before it called the plain of Ilium. So that's where it goes back to. Son of Ilus, Laomedon, son of Laomedon, Priam, also named Podargus. So it's an interesting background. That's why Poseidon and Apollo are in support of Troy, Tros, even before the judgment of Paris, which led Aphrodite to be in support of Troy and led Hera and Athena to be against the city. And so there, that's the myth for today. I think that's a sufficient amount to chew on for now. Keep in mind that we're developing this idea of Hector as the paradigm. He's the hero of the story, the guy who risks everything for what is good to protect others, which is the source of the word heros, originally, protector of other people. And that he stands in contrast to the person of Paris, his brother, who's kind of a scalawag, and stands in contrast also to the person of Achilles, who has taken himself away from his responsibilities in a sort of juvenile way and has to change or grow. Hopefully all that was helpful to you. And if you had any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll answer any that I can. And we'll read next time when we get together, we'll read book 8, which is the tide of battle turns. We'll get a lot more of a fighting business going on in the next book. And thank you so much for joining me this time around. And I look forward to having you join me next time that we meet to talk about Homer's Iliad, book 8, next week. Thank you all. God bless.